The coin had already been flipped 4,000 times before I opened my eyes. That was the first thing the calibration array did to every subject, run the baseline while you were still groggy from transit sleep, before you knew enough to perform for it. 41 electrodes at my temples and wrists, a thin collar reading my pulse, and in front of me a column of soft violet light where a number rotated, faster than I could read, landing on 0 or 1, 0 or 1. A virtual coin coming down on a quantum edge no hand could nudge. I was told to want heads. Just that. Want it, the way you'd want anything. 4012 trials, said the voice above me, flat and precise, the kind of voice that had said this sentence to a great many species and expected the same answer each time. Please begin. I wanted heads. I'd done this kind of thing before, back home, in a windowless university lab, for a stipend and free coffee, a string of researchers convinced that human intention could tug at falling dice. It never worked there either, not in any way they could publish. So I didn't expect much here. I sat in the chair the Kedron had built for a body shaped roughly like mine, watched the column spin, and thought, simply and without strain, heads. 41 electrodes recorded nothing dramatic. No spike, no surge. Just a pattern, underneath, too slow and too small to call a signal, until the chief metrologist, a long-jointed Kedron named Vresatel, leaned over the readout and went very still. Run it again, she said. They ran it 11 more times before the shift ended. 11 more times the coin came down heads more often than mathematics allowed, never by much, 53%, 56%. Once an outlying 61 that made a junior recorder drop her stylus, but always, every single trial, in the direction I'd asked it to go. Could be the array, I offered, on the 12th run, mostly to fill the silence. Faulty seed generator. Happens. The array calibrates against true vacuum noise, Vresa said, not looking up. It does not have a direction to be faulty in. That was the day they stopped calling me a baseline subject and started calling me a phenomenon, though nobody told me that part out loud. I only noticed because the next morning, the chair was bigger. They scaled it up the way scientists always do, by doubling the stakes and watching what broke. A single quantum bit became a 1,000-particle array. 1,000 became a stress test on the ship's own decay rate monitor, an instrument so finely tuned that Vresa told me, with what I'd learned was her version of pride, that it hadn't drifted more than a rounding error in 9 years of service. They wired it into the same column of violet light and asked me to want a particular isotope to decay slow. I wanted it. Quietly. The way you want your alarm not to go off on a morning you're tired. The decay rate dropped 4% below its mean and stayed there for the full 11 minutes of the trial, then snapped back the instant the testing officer told me I could stop. Vresa didn't speak for almost a full minute after that. When she did, it wasn't to me. She was dictating to her recorder, in the clipped administrative cadence I'd come to recognize as how the Kedron sounded when they were frightened and didn't want anyone to notice. Affect magnitude scales with subject investment, not subject effort, she said. Recommend immediate reclassification from statistical curiosity to active variable. I wasn't trying hard, I told her, because it felt important that she understand that. I wasn't trying at all. I just wanted it. That, she said, is the part the directorate is going to have trouble with. They brought in 3 more humans after that, over the following weeks, run through smaller versions of the same tests with smaller versions of the same result, and a pattern took shape that the Institute's own statisticians fought for 2 days before admitting on paper. The skew wasn't about focus, or training, or willpower in the way the word usually meant. It scaled with how much a person actually had riding on the outcome. A coin flip with nothing behind it nudged the numbers by 1% or 2. A coin flip standing in for something a person genuinely needed moved them further. Nobody on the Vantral Kale had a clean way to measure want, so they used me, because by then I had the most trial hours logged, and because, Vresa told me later, with the closest thing to an apology I ever heard from her, I was, in her words, disturbingly calm about all of it. I told her I'd had practice not panicking about things I couldn't control. She wrote that down too. There was one trial in that stretch I still think about. Vressa wanted to isolate the variable cleanly, so she ran a control where the outcome meant nothing to me at all, a coin flip tied to a storage drone 3 decks away, no consequence, no stake. The numbers came back flat, dead average, the way they should have from the start. Then she ran the same flip again, except this time she told me, beforehand, that the drone was carrying the only surviving recording of my mother's voice, salvaged off a relay buoy years ago and never backed up. It wasn't true. She admitted that afterward. But I didn't know it wasn't true while I sat in the chair, and the skew that trial threw was the largest they'd logged yet, nearly 9 points off the mean, on a coin flip attached to nothing real at all. Vressa wrote 3 pages on that single trial alone. The variable, she concluded, wasn't truth. It was belief, and how much a person had riding on it inside their own head. The test that ended the program happened by accident, 3 weeks in, during a routine systems check that had nothing to do with me. I was in the calibration vault for an unrelated baseline run when the containment field probability buffer on reactor 2 threw an amber fault. I didn't understand the readouts at the time. Vressa explained it to me afterward, in the flat voice she used when she didn't want to sound as unsettled as she was. The buffer existed to smooth out a small, constant quantum jitter in the field geometry, a jitter that was normally so far below tolerance it didn't matter. The fault meant the smoothing had stopped. The jitter was now free to walk, randomly, toward catastrophic resonance or away from it, with no preference either way. Pure unweighted chance. The kind of chance that, on average, across 10,000 recorded incidents in Kedron history, resolved itself safely in under 4 minutes 9 times out of 10. They had 4 minutes. The engineers were already running for the manual override. Vressa looked at me instead. I am going to ask you something, she said, and I want you to understand it is not an order. Ask, I said. Want it to hold. I didn't have data, training, or even a clear idea of what holding looked like on her displays. I just understood, the way you understand a held breath in the next room, that something near me was about to break, and that I would rather it didn't. So I sat in the chair that had become almost comfortable, and I wanted it to hold the way you want a glass not to slip out of your hand, not loud, not desperate, just absolutely, entirely meant. The amber fault cleared in 51 seconds. Nobody on the bridge could explain why. The manual override hadn't engaged yet. The engineers found it still locked when they reached it. The jitter simply stopped walking randomly and walked, instead, back towards stable, against odds that the Institute's own historical record put at roughly 1 in several hundred. Vressa came down to the vault afterward and stood in front of me for a long moment without saying anything, the way you might stand in front of a result you've checked 4 times and can't make say anything else. We have measured what you call luck in over 4,000 species, she said finally. In every one of them, across 40 years of records, it was noise. Pattern seeking. A trick of memory, picking out the wins and burying the losses. We built our entire actuarial doctrine on that fact. Threat models. Engagement odds. Containment failure tolerances. All of it assumes the universe doesn't care what anyone wants. And now? Now we have one species, she said, where it does. Where the caring gets stronger exactly when the stakes do. Where a calm, ordinary, untrained person can reach into a closing system and ask it, politely, not to kill her, and it listens. I didn't have anything clever to say to that. I was tired, and the chair was, as always, slightly too small. I just wanted it to hold, I said. That's all I did. Vressa filed her final report to the Causality Standards Institute that night. I read it later, once it had been cleared for me to see. The recommendation took up 4 lines at the bottom of 11 pages of data, that all engagement probability tolerances involving human subjects be revised upward by an unspecified, currently unmeasurable margin, and that the constant the Institute had used for 40 years to define statistical certainty be formally annotated. for the first time in its history, with an exception. The exception had my name on it. The array still runs, 3 years later. I still sit in the chair sometimes, when they need a number. But the Institute stopped calling it a random number generator. On the newer paperwork, it's listed under a different heading entirely, instrument, calibrated against Kessler.